Hi, this is Jessie, and we are doing a becoming chat today with Tabi Wallington. Tabi is absolutely fantastic. She's got a brilliant podcast called It Looks Like Courage, which we're going to talk a little bit about today. She's also married to a wonderful man called Bob, and with two little kids, Phoebe and Libby. And she's recently moved to Bristol, which is wonderful because I first met her in London. And then quite soon after that, I think it was a couple of months later, you moved to Bristol, and it's been so lovely to have you here. And so we're going to talk about the podcast called It Looks Like Courage. And most of you will probably remember that recently Lisa and I did a becoming chat about spirituality. And I was talking about how one of the spiritual practices that I've used in the last little while is really focusing on people's stories and drawing from people's stories in a way that has given me a lot of courage to walk through some of the hardest stuff that I've had to walk through this year. And Tabi's podcast was one of the resources that I went to just find these fantastic stories about people that had overcome and was so encouraged by them. So I want to share that with you. And I just love, Tabi, would you tell us, like, how did that start? What is It Looks Like Courage? Tell us about how it all began.
Wow, yeah, so great to be with you. Thank you for having me, and thanks for endorsing and saying that's a good podcast to listen to. Well, I think it actually kind of came out of a conversation with Bob, who'd mentioned. I've always done youth work since finishing uni. That's kind of different versions of it, but that's the job I've always done, is with young people. And at one of those jobs, we did a courage retreat where we just took a few of the young people away and just sort of talked about what does courage look like in everyday life. How do you find courage to be yourself, to deal with the different things that sort of teenage life throws at you. And we were chatting about that, and he was sort of saying, well, like, you should start that back up again, or have you thought about doing those again? And I had my littlest one was 2 months, and I was thinking, I have not got capacity for that right now. Anyway, and then the same day I read this newspaper article that was all about the lack of resilience in young people, and I almost felt like that was quite unfair, because I don't know that there's a lot of empowering young people to be resilient anyway. And I think the things that they're going through now, like with access to the internet and just like constant bad news and things, that's new. That's not something that many generations have ever lived through. So even that is a small thing that they go through. It's just different. And so I was having this kind of conversation then, and then felt this challenge of like, well, how do you build resilience? Like, what does that look like? And then I had one of those evenings where I just couldn't get to sleep, and I just kept thinking, like, kind of tossing and turning, and kept thinking about like courage and resilience and how it all kind of plays out in all of our lives. And then actually I'm a Christian, so I started to pray. I was like, God, I just need to go to sleep. This is kind of really frustrating. I just need to park this. And then I just felt this like prompting of like, kind of, so it just felt like sort of guidance to start sharing other people's stories. Wow. Of like ordinary courage. And I felt like that phrase, like ordinary courage, was really important, because we do have amazing examples, thankfully, in sort of society of like really courageous, amazing people. But sometimes when they're like of such a celebrity status, or like in such a sort of big setting, they've been courageous, it just feels completely unattainable to like the normal ordinary people. So I felt like, I know I want to tell stories of ordinary people, because everybody I know has taken some courageous steps, whether they feel it or not, and whatever it looks like. Sometimes just surviving is courageous, isn't it? And so I wanted to sort of begin to share stories, and I felt like a podcast would be a sort of straightforward-ish way to do that. So the vision of the whole podcast basically is it's sharing ordinary stories of courage, and it's supposed to encourage us to know that we actually are being courageous, just living our normal lives, wherever they might be, but also to inspire us, to sometimes make more courageous decisions, or whatever it might be. So that's kind of what it is. And I basically just asked different people that I either am friends with or just sort of bumped into somehow to be on it. So it is just lots of, they're not ordinary, but they are ordinary kind of people. So yeah, that's kind of what it is and how it started.
Yeah, it's so brilliant, because I even love how right at the beginning of the podcast you say that I hope it'll show you where you're already being courageous. And I just think that's exactly what it does. When I was listening to them, I did feel really inspired, and sometimes quite challenged by some of the stories, in terms of, oh, I could do that, or I could do that better. But a lot of what I felt is just quite a little bit less alone in some of my challenges, going, oh, I am actually being courageous by walking through what I'm walking through, just like they were. So it is such a profound concept. And are most of the people you said are your friends, people that you know?
Yeah, mostly. There's a couple, actually, in this coming series that's just about to come out, there is 1 or 2 people that I don't really know but have been introduced and just felt like, oh, I'll just ask and see what happens. And also, it isn't just for young people, it's just the beginning of it sort of came from thinking about young people, but actually I think it's pretty accessible for most people.
So. Oh, it's so important for all of us, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I'm definitely not a youth anymore, but I just feel like, we all need that resilience, and stories are just such a beautiful way to do that. They literally do encourage, like fill us with courage.
Yeah.
What do you think? What is it about story that's able to release that?
Yeah, I don't know. I was thinking about it earlier, and I was sort of thinking, actually, like, I've always loved stories. I've always loved reading, and I think I get so much more kind of wrapped into a character through like the sort of stories of people, whether it's fictional or real. And even like my compassion grows. So like, you could read 2 different stories on 2 different sides of some kind of argument, but when you're met with like real life, you feel differently towards someone, or like a historical figure or something, don't you? Because it's sort of like they're a real person. So I think there's a real power in sort of that, like that similarity, almost like that we're all human and we all fail and we all succeed and we all struggle. It's like, I think there's a real power in that sense of like it unifies us. Like, we all have a story, and it reminds, even in our treatment of people, sometimes when you're driving and you're so cross with someone who just cut you up, and then sometimes I think they could be rushing to the hospital, or that, I don't know anything about their story, but actually imagining their story suddenly creates a sense of compassion for why they were driving too fast, or actually it's fine, you happily push me out of the queue or something if you've got an emergency. And that's not always the case, but like knowing someone's story creates a real sense of compassion and like, yeah, unity, which I think is really essential for us to function in society and grow as human beings. So I think the power of like it helps us see people differently when we know a story is really
so
important.
true. And even sometimes with like a particular issue, it can get so in your head. Like I've often thought about concepts, but then when you actually hear about a person who's living something out, it can completely change how I think about that concept once it's related to a human, and you're actually looking at it on that human level. So powerful.
Yeah, I totally agree. Even at the moment with all the sort of like politics conversations and stuff that have all been like swept up, you don't necessarily change your opinion, but your heart can be slightly softer when you hear someone's story, or whatever. It's like there is something powerful about relating to people as humans, and maybe we see them more humanly when they have a story.
Yeah, and I think you see as well that it's not black and white. Like even with those sort of quite political issues, they become a lot more grey when there's people's experiences and people's stories that are related to them. Yeah,
definitely. Which can be quite hard. But also,
sometimes quite nice to have black and white.
I know, sometimes it's easier, isn't it? But or that you feel more justified in your treatment or opinion or something until they become more grey. And I also, with the stories that I guess we talk about, I think in the podcast, I just think it releases something like exciting, like hearing other people's lives gives you an excitement for your own life, or just like, I think all of us have maybe thought we'd go in a direction, and then just life happens, doesn't it? And there's so many ways that we build connection and relationships and work and stuff, and I think just hearing people's stories just gives you a piece of like it's my journey, and it's like it's my story, and it's not going to look the way I thought it was when I was 12 or whatever, but there's like room for things to change and to happen and to grow. And I think that provides hope, doesn't it, when you don't feel like you're going to be in the same situation necessarily, or sort of stagnant forever.
And just makes you feel just less. I think when we have those pictures and we're a little bit isolated, and maybe it's been particularly bad this year, I imagine, for a lot of people, because I'm still connecting on Zoom to my close people, but what I'm not having is those sort of more random conversations you have with people outside of your world. And I think there's something in that where you connect to, you sort of have this imagined reality of what everybody else is living, but when you start talking to other people, you realize, oh, it's fine, no one really has it all together. We're all figuring it out. And it does bring a peace.
And actually hearing the whole story presents more than like an Instagram picture, doesn't it? Do you know what I mean? Like often, like probably in the sort of like young kids mum world that I'm in, there's like a sort of two strands of like Instagram. You've got sort of like perfect life of people who seem to like be able to spend the entire day sort of like crafting and creating and everything's perfect. And then you've got these other people that are like, oh, here's the Instagram photo, and then their story is kind of like, and here's the truth behind it, and it's just like chaos. And it's not to say that people can't have those perfect craft days, but it's that sense of like what's behind that one image of someone that's been projected or something. And when you hear a story, I think then it kind of shifts, and even that picture looks even better because you know so much more of the context or whatever it might be. But yeah, I think during lockdown, where there's been so little connection or like actual physical connection and so much virtual, it definitely, you feel like you're lacking the sort of deeper context of relationship. Or yeah, like you said, like you go to a friend's for dinner and somebody else is there that you don't know, and you just don't have those sorts of like broadening sort of horizon chats of meeting random people and learning new things.
Yeah, no, it's so true. And what's the feedback been like from the podcast? Like, how's the response been?
Yeah, I mean, some people don't feedback, but the people that have has been
people actually don't always feedback too.
I know, and you're sort of like desperately like, I just need a little encouragement. But yeah, no, it's been really fun. And one of the really fun things that I've enjoyed is where it's quite hard sometimes to sort of connect different friendships. Suddenly, like I've been able to introduce. So like the second one is Amanda, just my friend from the States, and she's so brilliant. And I had so many messages from my friends like, you need to introduce me to her, she sounds amazing, she's so inspiring, blah, blah. And I sort of knew it was very unlikely they'd ever actually get to meet, but it was really fun thinking like you kind of have met her in this kind of audio way. And you got, you know, people get to learn from her like I have. And so no, it's generally been good feedback. And it's just really nice when you hear people sort of saying, well, that's really encouraged me in this area, or whatever it might be, because that is the whole point. This is supposed to put courage into people where sometimes it feels lacking or they've not spotted it or something. So yeah, it's good.
Yeah, and I mean, Amanda, I'm not surprised you got loads of feedback from hers. It was brilliant. There were so many amazing sort of nuggets, and you can tell she's just quite like a go-getter, sort of inspiring person, you know, like, what, you are phenomenal.
Yeah. At the same time, if you met her, she's just so like people orientated and just fun and relaxed and stuff. So yeah, like she is
actually.
Like she's such a go-getter, she's so determined in certain things, but she's actually really quite chilled and easy to be around as well. But she's fun because she had like a career in the Navy, as obviously you've heard, and that whole part of her life is quite a man's world as well, and just sort of picturing her like sort of pushing for sort of like women's rights and other things in that context.
On a massive Navy ship.
I know. Well, I can't actually remember, her first job title is something like I've forgotten what it is, I'll have to look it up, but on a Navy ship, basically managing the whole ship.
Like, it was something big, I remember.
Oh, it's terrifying.
How do you do?
But she's just like, yeah, well, that's what I was trained for. And even that, I love that. It's like sometimes we don't have that certainty of like our own ability, and she's just like, well, that's what my job was, so yeah, I could do that. And I love that about her. It's just that sense of like, why would I doubt myself when I've been training for however many years? And
how amazing is that?
Yeah.
And they're also really interesting because her husband's a stay-at-home dad, isn't he? So I was really encouraged by the fact that they were just so comfortable with not having those, you know, normal social norms, and actually did what worked for them. And he loves it, and she goes out to work and loves that. And I love those stories where families are actually choosing what works for them.
No, they are they're amazing. and they're like unashamed about their choices, but also unashamed about where they are learning as well. They're quite, you know, it feels unusual sometimes to have people sort of quite open about things they do differently if they did it again or whatever, and that they sort of reevaluate and change as they go. And yeah, no, they're a great family.
Yeah, I got that impression that they're quite reflective about life, and maybe it was because she was obviously in a podcast where you would be reflecting, but I did also really enjoy sort of the way that she spoke about adoption and international adoption specifically, and how they've been on that journey themselves, but actually they have some quite strong opinions on, oh well, we've done it this way, but there's a lot to think about when you do it that way, about, you know, which was just so interesting, such a fascinating journey.
Yeah, and vulnerable, because again, on that sort of their adoption story, they're not saying they've got that right. Like they know that he's supposed to be part of their family, so in that way, you know, they wouldn't change a thing. But at the same time, with what they know now, they're not sure that they would agree with it almost now. So yeah, it's really interesting. She's great.
Courage to even say that. It was a brilliant story. And another one that I really loved, which I did cry a lot in the end, and I know everybody I know who's listened to it, and I'm sure it's was bittersweet for you even releasing that podcast, was Kerry's story. Do you want to give us a bit of a background on Kerry?
Yeah, so we met Kerry when we were living in Watford, and she is she's amazing. She's full of life. She's such a gem. But I think it was at 24 she got diagnosed with cancer, and then she basically in the podcast talks about the diagnosis and the treatment and multiple treatments, and then ultimately after a while she's told that the cancer is terminal, and I think she's given 12 months to live. So yeah, that was probably the hardest podcast to record, because I so desperately didn't want to be like my emotion to really be part of it. I really wanted to focus on her story, but I don't think you can hear it, but there are definitely moments where I'm like choking up listening, and can feel the sort of tears coming down my face. But her story is amazing, because it's like, it's so rare, I think, to hear someone in their sort of early 20s having to sort of battle such a horrible sickness, and then know in a sense that she hasn't won the battle with it health-wise, and finding peace with dying and leaving her family and other things. And actually what feels really special about that is also being able to give it to her family. Like, I'm sure they've got so many things from her, but possibly not a recorded version of her sharing about herself and her story. So that felt really special, to be able to email her parents and just say that, you know, this is for you whenever you're ready to listen to it. But that one had a lot of feedback as well, and I think she so wanted to do it well. She so wanted to sort of I guess finish life well, and I think that the way she shares is just another I guess like testimony of what her life looked like and what God's done in her life, that she's leaving for people to hear and hopefully to encourage other people. So yeah, that one was really special, hard to record, but I'm very thankful that we managed to do it before.
And just one of the most beautiful stories I think I've ever. I was quite glad that you did start with saying, you know, that she has unfortunately passed on, and because actually the story is quite traumatic in terms of, you know, it was quite a lot of hope initially, and she thought she was going to get through it a couple of times, and then had loads of different types of treatment, and then to eventually get that diagnosis was obviously terribly sad. And yet I love the fact that the first thing she did was went on an amazing trip with 10 of her friends. Just had a great time. And then sort of kept saying, I am going to choose joy. And that's really stuck with me. I think of that often when things are happening, like, joy is a choice. And I think we don't often think about joy as being a choice. We think about feeling happy as something that happens off the back of something happening to us, or how we wake up in the morning. And so just the concept of, oh no, I can choose joy in this moment. And if she can choose joy, I certainly can choose joy, was just so inspiring.
And it's almost like you don't want it to be like a comparative thing, like, oh, if she can choose joy, but at the same time you're like, wow, she chooses joy, like she chose joy consistently throughout the whole treatment, but especially that last 12 months or 11 months, I'm actually not quite sure if it was 11 or 12. And it does make you go like, wow, like I've got to reflect on my life. If I'm not able to see joy in things, like I want to make a change, or and I think, she says in the podcast, like some of her friends watching what happened to her made some quite big life choices, like changing career and things. And I think she was saying they're so happy that they've just chosen what does bring them joy and what is good in life, over maybe thinking, oh, I need to get on the sort of housing market now, and so therefore I'm going to earn as much money, or whatever it might be. So it's really, the choose joy tagline of her life is, I think it's still working in people, which is really amazing.
Yeah, really, really amazing. I think another one that stood out for me, I think it was Susie, who was she was talking a lot about truth and lies, wasn't she? And I found, she obviously has a bigger story, which maybe you can give us a little bit of context of in a minute. But for me, I thought that was another amazing key for just life in general, of being able to have that habit of identifying, what am I thinking that is true, and what am I thinking that's actually not true? Because we just trust our thoughts, or we think we have a gut reaction. And it's been quite a revelation to me lately to realize that my gut reaction might actually not be truth.
It's a hard reaction, isn't it, to realize we're not always
but it's so powerful to be able to have that practice of evaluating, I've got this thought that's come into my mind, is it true or is it not true, and base your actions on that. There's something really empowering about that, I think.
Yeah, I agree. She's another amazing lady. Her context, her story is it's a kind of twofold thing that she sort of shares about, is partly battling an eating disorder, and then also dealing with or processing the grief of losing her dad when she was sort of early teens. And I think actually both of those two things, the identity message is a strong part of, and truth and lies. And it's actually an amazing story of how she would say she sort of overcame her eating disorder through the kind of the power of truth, which is amazing. But also she talks about the sort of leftover fear of losing someone suddenly. So her dad, he had a heart attack when he was away, completely sudden thing. She got home from Christmas shopping and heard the news, and actually, like, then now as a mum, she has to battle these thoughts of like, what if suddenly something happens, or and she talks a lot about sort of truth and lies within that. And she's amazing. And it's also like within that. So for me, like, I went through like quite a traumatic grief like 4.5 years ago, and even listening to her sharing the sort of like some of the leftover pain of your mind spinning sometimes into these crazy anxious places, sort of because of the shock of losing someone. For me personally, that was like so helpful, listening to her sharing about how, number one, that it made it feel okay, and it made it feel kind of normal, that my brain would just go wild sometimes, but also hearing how she copes with it and how she deals with it. Then it kind of equips you to feel like I've got some keys now, and that's so even individually that was really helpful. But I know for others that have heard that, and also there's hope in it, like with her eating disorder. It's like there's so much hope in what she's sharing, how she kind of got through it. And so that, and also I think I'm really passionate about always finding hope in a situation, even when it's really dark. And she does that. She is able to sort of speak hope into lots of the tough stuff that she's gone through. So
which is such a skill, isn't it? Because I think it's so we can't always do that for ourselves when we're in whatever we're in, and story is just such a great way to benefit from somebody who's a little bit further down a road of maybe working through something that we're working through, that can release those keys, or at the very least make you feel less alone. But actually it's often a really helpful way to accelerate your own healing journey, so you tap into the people that have gone before,
and it helps you to believe it's possible. It's possible that things will look different, and it won't always feel in a certain way that it feels now, or and I think sometimes you just need that, don't you? You just need that sort of sense of vision that, you know, things will change, or it's possible for this to happen, or I won't always react like this when X happens or something.
Yeah, that's so true.
Yeah.
Oh, well, Tabi, I feel like I could go into each one of the stories on the podcast and we could have a whole discussion about it. But I'm going to instead suggest that everybody who's watching go and listen to It Looks Like Courage. I'll put the links up on our social media. Tabi's also, the Looks Like Courage podcast is on Instagram as well. But tell us before you go, what's next for It Looks Like Courage? You've released season 1. Is there anything else in the pipeline?
Yeah, well, season 2 is mostly recorded. I just have to work out editing in the midst of working and childcare and everything else, so it takes me a while. But yeah, there's some brilliant people coming up. I think one of the early ones will be a friend of mine called Matt, who is a guy in his 40s, and part of his story is like learning about being an emotional man, and it's really beautiful. Him just talking about the freedom he's found to engage with emotion and his heart, which is, it sounds probably a little bit like fluffy, but it isn't. It's amazing. And they also adopted 3 little girls quite a while ago, and he shares a little bit about being a father to 3 girls, and how that looked for him, kind of in line with some of the emotional stuff that he was learning about himself. But that's a really great one. And then there's some other brilliant people coming. Someone who has written a book on dating. So
wow, okay.
A little bit about sort of vulnerability of sharing about dating, and also she talks about being like a recovering addict, and that's pretty amazing stuff. But there's like amazing moments, but also there's very ordinary things as well. So it's trying to kind of have a balance of we're not all of us have got like this big sort of like moment where something shifts, and there's like, that's what we're talking about. For lots of us, it's just life, isn't it, and what hits us, and some things so there's lots of stories that hopefully just draw out that everyday courage, as well as ones that are maybe a bit more specific about a like courageous moment, or lots to look forward to. Well,
it sounds really exciting. I'm really looking forward to season 2. And thank you so much for coming and chatting with us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Been really, really good. So we'll put up all the information of how you can follow Tabi and It Looks Like Courage. And I highly, highly recommend that you go and just binge listen to all of the stories. Thank you so much.
That's okay.